Could you share with us what your life was like before experiencing that near-death experience? Of course. Back then, I was working in the Seattle area, specifically for King County. My role was that of a supervisor in the probation department of the juvenile courts. I deeply loved my job and found great pleasure in interacting with teenagers. I always used to say that I would continue doing it until the last day of my life. I never imagined how prophetic those words would be. It's fascinating, isn't it? And that's how I came to experience a near-death experience. It all began on May 5, 2006, a day that would be etched in my memory. At that moment, I was facing a kidney stone that had become lodged on the right side. I had experienced kidney stones in the past, so the symptoms were immediately familiar to me. How did I face the situation at first? At first, I believed I could endure the pain or even overcome it, trusting that, as in previous occasions, it would eventually fade away. However, this time was different. The pain persisted relentlessly. So what did I do then? I clearly remember heading to the emergency room. In fact, I felt quite calm. I just arrived and said, "I have a kidney stone. It's on the right side." I was already familiar with the process thanks to previous experiences. I knew they would take me to a room, administer morphine, and gradually, the pain would begin to subside. Everything unfolded as I had anticipated in the hospital, although not in the way I had imagined. During the evaluations, the doctors discovered that I also had a kidney infection, which led to me being given antibiotics to treat it. Given this situation, they decided that the best course of action was to keep me hospitalized overnight and scheduled a surgery for the following day. And how was that surgery? The operation went smoothly. The stones were destroyed just as we had planned. However, what we did not know at that moment was that I was part of that group of people for whom the antibiotics I had been given were not effective against the infection. That sounds really alarming. What happened after that? When the stones were broken, the infection, which was like a poison, entered my bloodstream. I became septic, and from that moment on, everything in my body started to fail. Not only the heart and the lungs, but everything in your being. It must have been a terrifying experience. What do you remember from that moment? Do you know what surprised me the most? It was how little fear I felt when I realized I was on the brink of death. I am a born-again Christian and have always believed that, upon dying, one goes to heaven. So, when I realized what was happening, the only thing I could think was, I am going home. Could you describe what happened next? According to medical records, I was declared clinically dead for approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes. However, my experience during that time was completely different. I remember leaving my body and passing through the floors of the hospital, ascending towards the blue sky and the vast outer space. It was astonishingly fast. Can you imagine how fast it was? It's complicated to express, but a Bible verse always comes to my mind that says, "Absent from the body, present with the Lord." That's exactly how I experienced it. I moved faster than a blink. The moment my upper eyelid met the lower one, I was already in the sky. It's truly fascinating what one can see while traveling. As I was heading towards that realm, I remember seeing it. Some describe it as a bright light at the end of a tunnel. But for me, that experience resembled more of a window. I don't mean to say it was a window in the literal sense, but it's the best way I find to describe it. What happened when you reached that window? When I crossed through it, my friend, everything was in harmony. There was nothing that could disturb the calm. It was a moment of pure peace, where nothing bothered or unsettled you. How did you feel in that instant? What surprised me the most was the feeling of finally fitting in. I hadn't been aware of how displaced I felt before experiencing this. When I arrived in heaven, I immediately felt that I was welcome. Everything around me was welcoming me with open arms. And when I say everything, what exactly do I mean? I mean absolutely everything. Not just God Almighty, Jesus Christ, or the Holy Spirit. Literally everything in the sky seemed to celebrate my presence, and that feeling enveloped me as I looked around. The trees, with their outstretched branches, welcomed me warmly. As I focused on the flowers, it seemed to me that they greeted me with their vibrant colors. In that place, everything seemed to overflow with joy at my arrival. That resonates deeply with me. What was your greatest wish at that moment? You know, I hadn't even realized that I harbored that wish until I arrived at that place. But more than anything, I longed to see Jesus Christ. I wanted to see him face to face. For me, that was of utmost importance. I understood that heaven is not just a place you long to reach, but a person you desire to be with. I can recount my journey in search of Jesus as I walked through a forest. Before me stood several trees, imposing and full of life. I was certain that Jesus Christ was beyond them. At that moment, an idea crossed my mind. I had to go through those trees to be able to see him. So, with determination, I began to move forward, and as I did, the trees parted before me, as if inviting me to continue. That is really amazing. What emotions did that experience awaken in you? I felt that the trees on both sides were whispering, "He is going to see the King. He is going to see the King. He is going to see the King." That was the feeling I perceived in your message. And what happened next? I stepped into a clearing, a vast open space, and there was Jesus. He was a little to my left, watching a group of angels and what I call the redeemed people. They were those who had lived on earth and were now in heaven. How did you react upon seeing Jesus? I remember the moment I approached him. Instead of simply standing up and walking over, I decided to come closer in a more intimate way. I leaned forward, knelt down, and placed my hands on the ground, fixing my gaze on his feet. Can you describe what you saw in that moment? He was standing in front of an immense crowd, millions of people, actually billions. From my position, I could barely see his feet. I could only lift my gaze enough to catch a glimpse of part of his legs, but his face remained out of my reach at that moment. I couldn't know what thoughts or feelings were crossing through him at that moment. The only thing he could articulate was, "You did this for me." Every corner of my being, every fiber of my existence understood that the only reason I found myself in heaven was because of what Jesus had done. A deep sense of gratitude flooded me as I thought about his sacrifice for me. How could I express that immense gratitude? The only thing I could do was repeat thank you over and over again. I was completely overwhelmed with gratitude. At that moment, I stopped to reflect. The only reason I was here was because of what he had done. In my mind, I understood that he did it for everyone, but deep down in my being, I felt it was something personal. It was as if he had not only given his life on the cross so that I could be present, but also had created all of heaven exclusively for me. I don't want to give the impression that I was being selfish, because I truly wasn't, but that's how I perceived it, as if everything he had done was solely for me. That is an overwhelming feeling. And what happened next? At that moment, I began to observe her body. I looked from her feet to her ankles, and I felt that her ankles loved me. Then, my eyes settled on her calves, and they loved me too. Upon reaching his knees, the same feeling enveloped me. They loved me. Everything about him, every part I contemplated, seemed to be filled with love for me. His hands, with their delicacy, also loved me. But it was when I finally reached his face and he looked at me that I experienced a connection so deep that it still moves me today. He looked at me with an intensity that made me feel as if I had never disobeyed in my entire life. That look left a deep mark on me. Without a doubt, it was an overwhelming experience. How did you interpret that expression? It made me reflect on how, when he says he forgives, he truly forgets. I have already read it in the Bible, in chapter 8 of Hebrews and also in chapter 10. There a profound truth is revealed. When God forgives, he forgets. In that moment, I experienced the gaze of Jesus, and I understood that he was an eternal being who would never know death. My body ceased to exist, but I, the authentic essence that inhabits it, will never know death. This is a profound reflection. What happened after that encounter? After that moment with him, in which he shared with me a series of revelations, I like to refer to it as a download, similar to what is done on a computer. He looked at me intently and, with surprising calmness, said, "No, it's not your time yet. Go back." That's how he expressed it. What did I feel when being sent back? In reality, I felt quite at peace with the decision. I remember that after that conversation, I did not cross the forest to return to the place where I had entered heaven. Instead of simply passing over it, I felt as if I were flying. Can you imagine what that experience of flying is really like? It's not about flying as we conceive it here on Earth. It's something much more extraordinary. You can say with complete certainty, I want to be 3 meters above that surface. And suddenly, you find yourself there, floating in the air. And suddenly, you find yourself there. The best way to describe it is like in the Bible, when Jesus walked on water. There is no room for fear. So you can rise as high as you wish. That sounds really amazing. But what happened when you arrived at the place where you entered? When I arrived at the place where I was going to depart, there was no door that opened to let me out. I simply knew that the next step would take me out of that realm. I remember staying there for a moment, feeling that my body was still not ready for what was to come. I was not ready, and that filled me with joy. And what did I do at that moment? I remember turning around, and as I did, the forest unfolded before me. I knew that Jesus was on the other side of that forest, but it seemed I could simply veer to the left, and as I did so, my friend, all of creation vibrated with happiness. You can describe what you saw. They were impressive mountains with dazzling beauty. At first glance, they looked like the waves of the ocean in motion, as if they were gliding smoothly beside me. However, what I was truly gazing at were mountains that moved, creating a fascinating illusion that challenged reality. I was just thinking, oh buddy, this is simply wonderful. I was enjoying every moment because, to be honest, I thought I would stay there forever. That sounds amazing. And what did you do next? I knew I had to return to Jesus, so I decided to approach him once again. This time, I approached him from the opposite side. For some reason, I decided to follow him, and suddenly, I found myself back in the same position I had been in the first time. I knelt before him once again. Then he began to speak to me, sharing some further reflections on what was happening at that moment. Could you describe what you saw or felt during that encounter? I remember the light that radiated from him. I didn't mention it in our first conversation, but there was an intense light that completely enveloped me. It sounds beautiful, doesn't it? And what happened after that second encounter? After that moment, he looked at me again, and in his eyes shone a deep and sincere love. And he told me once more, "No, it is not your time yet. Go back." How did you react this time? The second time, my friend, I flew over the trees again. I reached that limit at the edge where I had entered, and it seemed that if I took one more step, I would cross to the other side. I was ready to step out when suddenly a feeling overwhelmed me. My body was not ready yet. At that moment, I decided to stay. So you had another chance to explore? Yes, this time, instead of heading left, I chose to go to the right of the forest. And there I discovered a world full of wonders. It seemed that that side belonged more to liquids, as if it were dominated by waters, seas, and rivers. I'm not sure why they were there, but there they were. Unmistakable. Can you tell me what you saw from that side? The tones were more intense, a blue that cannot be compared to the one we know here. The colors of that place are much more vibrant than you could imagine. As I explored the surroundings, I immersed myself in a unique experience, observing a wide variety of animals that inhabit that region. The most fascinating thing was the abundance of creatures in the sky, a spectacle that left me in awe. This is how I continued my exploration, eager to discover what else this magical place had in store for me. So I returned to Jesus and my friend. They were always present. I don't understand why I hadn't recognized them before. Once again, I went back to the same place where I had already been with Jesus, and I stayed watching his feet. Then, I looked up, and, on the other side of him, I saw my family. Can you tell us more about that moment? There was my grandmother Mary right in the center of the scene. She was part of a group on that side and stood out, standing well in front. Behind her were other relatives, and beyond them, even more kin, forming an endless chain of generations united by their connection to Jesus Christ and the Father. They all came to welcome me. Undoubtedly, it must have been an exciting moment. Of course, you had already noticed it in your experience. Now I understand that they were present the first time I was with Jesus. I also know that I saw them the second time, but at that moment I didn't pay attention to them. My focus was completely on Jesus. However, on this occasion, something different happened. First, I directed my attention to Jesus and then to them. How could I describe their appearance? It is complicated to portray people in heaven, as time there seems not to exist. I often tell those who listen to me that they shone, that their smiles were huge, and that they radiated pure and overflowing joy. Then, a reflection overwhelmed me. Wow, I could imagine my whole family in heaven, smiling and enjoying each other's company. I thought to myself that I had never witnessed anything like this on earth. The image was truly beautiful. This experience completely transformed my perception of the family in heaven. Before, I believed that we would all simply be part of God's family and that would be all. However, upon reflecting on what I experienced, I realized that family has a profound meaning for God. I began to understand the true importance of family in His kingdom. There was an unexpected surprise in seeing certain people there. I encountered individuals I never imagined would be present. I was convinced that they had not made it to heaven, as according to my own criteria, they did not meet the requirements. However, they did meet God's criteria, even though they did not meet mine. What do you think God's criteria are, according to your understanding? The criterion that God establishes is to accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. This is the fundamental requirement that He asks of us. So, after that experience with your family, what happened next? Let me share this with you, friends. My family came to welcome me with open arms. Jesus, in a gesture full of love, poured out a great amount of blessings upon me, and in that moment, I was able to experience the wonder of being in heaven. It was amazing to see how the entire sky came together in a beautiful dance of praise and worship to God. However, suddenly, Jesus looked at me again, and with a firm and determined voice, He said, "No, it is not your time, you must return." How did you feel receiving such a strong command? I felt that all of creation around me was stepping aside as if to say, "He is not talking about me, He is talking about you." In that moment, I felt like a soldier. I had already served in the Air Force, so it was as if I responded with a firm, "Yes, sir." That was the feeling that overwhelmed me. And so, I prepared to leave. A deep sensation enveloped me as if He were whispering to me, "I need you more than here." Those weren't the exact words, but it was the essence of what I perceived, what my heart understood. Was there anyone else who addressed you at that moment? Sure, here is the translated text. Yes, my grandmother Mary was present and was watching me closely as He spoke those words. Then she said, "Bring as many of us with you as you can." It referred to our entire family here on earth. That is a truly powerful message that you conveyed afterward. I knelt before Jesus and suddenly I flew over the trees once again. I reached what I call the edge of heaven, but in an instant I took a step and found myself back in this world. How did you feel upon returning? Sadness overwhelmed me. I felt like a baby crying in desperation. I clearly remember the moment I entered the hospital room. I was floating above the bed, watching my own body. The efforts to help me had already ceased, and in the meantime, the staff began to gather their instruments and put away everything they had used. The doctor at that moment mentioned that he was signing the death certificate. Have you had any perception of how our relationships on earth continue or transform in heaven? Yes, I have had it. When I met my relatives in heaven, I recognized them all and felt a deep connection with each one of them. However, that relationship was different from the ones I had experienced on earth. There was a purity and perfection in our mutual love, completely free from the tensions or misunderstandings that we may have had in the earthly world. Everyone seemed to connect with each other through their bond with God. I remember you mentioned that at first you didn't want to return. Could you share more about your return to the body? It was after Jesus told me for the third time that it was not yet my time and that I had to go back. I felt a deep sense of purpose. My grandmother Mary had entrusted me with the task of gathering as many people as possible, and I understood that I had an important mission. As I left heaven, I experienced the sensation of traveling at an astonishing speed. just like when I first arrived there. Upon returning to the hospital room, I was confronted with a shocking scene. My body lay to one side. The medical team had ceased their efforts to save me and was now busy putting away the instruments. I could see how the doctor, with a serious expression, signed my death certificate. I floated above my body for a moment, and then I turned around to return to it. What happened when you returned to your body? The moment I re-entered my being, the heart monitor began to beep again, marking the rhythm of my heartbeats. The medical team, visibly surprised, immediately got to work on me. They intubated me and managed to get me to breathe again. The sensation was an overwhelming contrast to the deep joy I had just experienced in heaven. How did you feel physically after that experience? Physically, I was in a state of extreme weakness. My body had endured a draining experience. I was clinically dead for approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes, which made my recovery a long and challenging process. However, despite the physical difficulties, inside I felt renewed, filled with spiritual and emotional energy, and with a deep sense of purpose. How did this experience transform your life from that moment on? Everything has changed. Now I look at life, death, and eternity with a new perspective. I live each day with the full awareness that our time on earth is fleeting compared to the vastness of eternity, and that every moment matters. I am deeply committed to loving others and spreading the message of God's love to as many people as possible. Death no longer scares me. Instead, I appreciate even more the gift of life and the purpose that God has destined for me in this world. You mentioned that you now live with a renewed sense of purpose. Could you tell us more about that? Of course. After having a heavenly experience and receiving the message from my grandmother, who urged me to take as many people with me as I could, I feel a deep responsibility. Before we continue, just one request. Please subscribe to our channel. It really helps us keep going. It is my duty to share my story and help others understand the reality of heaven and the immense love of God. I try to live each day with the full awareness that our actions here have eternal repercussions. Your near-death experience has radically transformed your relationships with others. Now, I look at each person as a being deeply loved by God, just as I have felt His love for me. Before moving on, just one request. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot to keep going. This experience has transformed me, making me more patient, more compassionate, and with a deep desire to share the love I experienced in heaven with those around me. Furthermore, I have come to value my family relationships much more, recognizing how essential they are in my life, not only here, but in eternity. You mentioned that you observed animals in the sky. Could you share more about that experience? Yes, I was surprised by the large number of animals I saw in the sky. They were everywhere, and it seemed that each one of them had a special place in that vast space. I observed animals that we know on Earth, but also creatures I had never imagined. They all seemed to live in perfect harmony, not only with each other but also with everything around them. This experience made me reflect deeply on God's love for all His creation, not just for humanity. It's really fascinating. Did you have the opportunity to interact with any of those animals? No, not directly. I was so focused on Jesus and, later, on my family, that I didn't get to engage with the animals. However, I could feel their joy and the peace that emanates from everything in heaven. It seemed like they were praising God in their unique way. You spoke about the beauty of heaven, a topic that invites reflection. Could you describe it in more detail? It is a challenge as the words of this world fail to capture its essence. The colors were more vibrant than anything we can find here. The light was present in every corner, but it was not dazzling. Rather, it emanated a warmth that enveloped everything around it. Everything seemed to vibrate with an energy that was hard to describe. The trees danced gently, the flowers swayed gracefully, and even those objects that at first glance appeared inanimate seemed to possess their own vital essence, and everything was in perfect harmony. There wasn't a single slip or imperfection. It was a beauty that surpassed anything I could have imagined. You mentioned that Jesus conveyed information to you. Could you explain what you meant by that? It's complicated to express, but it was as if suddenly everything lit up inside me. It wasn't as if He spoke to me with words, but rather he conveyed a deep knowledge directly to my mind and spirit. I understood truths about God, about heaven, and about life that I had never been able to understand before. A part of that knowledge faded away when I returned to my body, but another part remained with me. I would like to share some of the specific insights I gained from that transformative experience. One of the most significant was a deeper understanding of God's love. I believed I understood the meaning of God's love for us, but what I experienced was a much deeper encounter. Through this, I gained an understanding of the nature of eternity, the relevance of our decisions in life, and the truth about the spiritual warfare that surrounds us. There are aspects of life that sometimes escape our words. These are such deep ideas that our earthly mind struggles to understand. You spoke about spiritual warfare. Could you elaborate on that? Sure, I have become more aware of the reality of spiritual forces, both benevolent and malevolent, that influence our world. I have realized that many of our struggles and challenges have a deep spiritual component that we often overlook. This revelation has led me to be more intentional in my prayer life and to recognize the importance of putting on what the Bible describes as the full armor of God. Your experience has completely transformed your perception of death. You no longer feel fear towards it. You have understood that it is not an end, but a transition to something much more beautiful than we can ever imagine. That doesn't mean I am in a hurry to leave this world. I am convinced that God has a purpose for me in this life, and I wish to fulfill it with all my being. However, I joyfully await the day when I return to heaven, when my time finally comes. Without a doubt, it transformed your vision of time. In the vast sky, time is not perceived as we experience it on earth. There, everything is an eternal present. This revelation led me to reflect on the ephemeral nature of our challenges and difficulties in this world. Within the vast scheme of life, I have become more aware of how I spend my time here, understanding that each moment is valuable and holds eternal significance. You mentioned that you encountered people in heaven that you did not expect to see. How has that influenced your perspective on salvation? This experience transformed my perspective and led me to be much less critical. I understood that God's grace and mercy are infinitely greater than we often imagine. It's not simply about adhering to a set of rules or achieving perfection. What truly matters is to open our hearts and accept Jesus and his sacrifice. Now, I am much more careful in assuming that I understand someone's spiritual state. Only God truly knows the heart of each person. You mentioned that you live with a greater sense of purpose at this moment. Could you share more about that? Of course. After having experienced the afterlife and receiving that moving message from my grandmother, I feel it is my duty to carry as many people with me as possible. This profound responsibility drives me to share my story and to help others understand the true reality of heaven and the immense love of God. I strive to live each day with the full awareness that our actions in this world have eternal consequences. Your near-death experience profoundly transformed your relationships with others. Now, I look at each person as a being deeply loved by God, just as I have felt his love towards me. This experience has transformed me, making me more patient, more compassionate, and with a deep desire to share the love I experienced in heaven with those around me. Additionally, I have come to greatly value my family relationships, understanding how essential they are in my life, not only here, but also in eternity. You mentioned that you observed animals in the sky. Could you share more about that experience? Yes, I was surprised by the large number of animals I saw in the sky. They were everywhere, and it seemed that each of them had a special place in that vast space. I observed animals I knew from the land, but also creatures I had never seen before. They all seemed to live in perfect harmony, not only among themselves but also with everything around them. This experience made me reflect deeply on the care that God has for all his creation, not only for humans, but also for the fascination they evoke. Did you have the opportunity to interact with any of these animals? The truth is no, not in a direct way. I was so focused on Jesus and later on my family that I really didn't have the chance to connect with them, but I could sense their joy and peace as if everything in heaven was shining with a divine light. They seemed to pay homage to God in their unique and special way. You spoke of the beauty of the sky. Could you describe it in more detail? It's complicated, as the words of this world fail to capture its essence. The colors were more vibrant than anything we had seen here. The light spread everywhere, but it was not dazzling. Instead, it emanated a warmth that enveloped and welcomed. Everything around us seemed to be infused with life, in a way that is difficult to describe. The trees, the flowers, and even those objects that seemed inanimate had a life of their own. Everything in this place vibrated in perfect harmony. There was no room for discord or imperfection. It was a beauty that surpassed anything I could have imagined. You mentioned that Jesus conveyed information to you. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that? It's complicated to express, but it was as if, all of a sudden, I acquired a deep understanding. It was not as if he were speaking to me with words, but rather he was conveying wisdom directly to my mind and spirit. I discovered profound truths about God, heaven, and life that I had never understood before. Although part of that knowledge faded upon returning to my body, another part remained etched in my being. Would you like me to share some of that specific knowledge I received during that revealing experience? One of the most significant discoveries I made was a deeper understanding of God's love. I believed I knew what that love meant towards us, but what I truly experienced was much more intense and transformative. Additionally, I acquired valuable knowledge about the nature of eternity, the importance of our decisions in earthly life, and the reality of the spiritual warfare that surrounds us. There are aspects that are so profound that they escape our words. They are ideas that our human minds struggle to understand. You talked about spiritual warfare. Could you elaborate on that topic? Yes, I began to become more aware of the reality of spiritual forces, both benevolent and malevolent, that influence our world. I realized that many of our struggles and challenges have a spiritual component that we often overlook. This has led me to be more intentional in my prayer life and to adopt what the Bible describes as the full armor of God. Without a doubt, your experience transformed my perspective on death. Now, I no longer feel fear in the face of it. I know that this is not the end, but a transition to something much more beautiful than we can imagine. Nevertheless, that does not mean that I am in a hurry to leave. I am convinced that God has a purpose for me in this world, and I wish to fulfill it fully. But I eagerly await the moment when I return to heaven, when my time finally comes. Has your way of seeing time changed? Without a doubt. In heaven, time is not perceived in the same way we experience it here. Everything felt like an eternal gift. This reflection led me to understand how ephemeral our challenges and difficulties in life are, especially when we contemplate them within the vast scheme of the universe. Furthermore, it has made me more aware of how I spend my time here, recognizing that every moment is valuable and holds a significance that transcends eternity. You mentioned that you saw people in heaven whom you never imagined you would encounter. How did that change your perspective on salvation? For me, it was a revealing moment that led me to be much less critical. I understood that God's grace and mercy are much broader than we often tend to recognize. It's not about adhering to a set of rules or achieving perfection. It is about opening our hearts to Jesus and recognizing his sacrifice. Since I understood this, I have learned to be much more cautious in assuming that I know the spiritual state of others. In the end, only God has the power to truly know the heart of each person. Your experience completely transformed your prayer life. Now, prayer has become something much more real and essential to me. After having felt God's presence in such an intimate way in heaven, I have begun to see prayer with a new perspective, as true communication with a loving Father. I am more open, more honest, and more confident in my words. You mentioned that everything in the sky welcomed you with open arms. Can you describe that feeling? For me, it was the deepest sense of belonging I have ever experienced. Here on Earth, we often face the internal struggle of feeling like we don't fit in or that we're not good enough. However, in heaven, those feelings simply have no place. Everything around me, from the soft grass that caressed my feet to the air that surrounded me, seemed to whisper, "You belong here. We are delighted that you have arrived." It was an overwhelming experience, full of acceptance and love. This moment completely transformed the way I perceive my body. That's right, it changed my perspective. I understood that, although our physical bodies are significant, they are actually just temporary vessels for our eternal spirits. In the sky, I experienced a connection with myself like I had never done before in my physical body. This revelation led me to worry less about my appearance and to focus more on cultivating my spirit. I remember you mentioned that the colors in the sky were more vibrant, and that radiant beauty resonated deeply within my being. Could you describe it in more detail? It's complicated, as we don't have words that can capture the essence of the colors I saw. Imagine the most vibrant blue you have ever experienced. The colors in the sky make that blue seem faded in comparison. There were also colors I had never contemplated before, colors that do not belong to our earthly spectrum. Everything seemed to glow from within, radiating those amazing hues. It was as if you had a sense of the immensity and vastness of the sky. The sky presented itself as both an intimate and infinite space. When I was with Jesus or my family, everything became close and personal, as if each moment was imbued with warmth. However, at the same time, I experienced an immensity, an endless beauty that unfolded in all directions, enveloping me in its splendor. It was as if the sky stretched infinitely, designed to embrace everyone and everything in perfect harmony. You spoke of how the trees opened up before you, as if they recognized your presence. You also observed other examples of nature, behaving in surprising ways that were different from what the earth usually shows. Yes, everything in the sky seemed to vibrate with a life of its own, in a way that is difficult to express. The mountains undulated like waves in an invisible sea, while the light danced around them, filling me with an enveloping sensation. Even those elements that we would consider inanimate here seemed to possess a form of consciousness in that magical place. Everything was oriented towards divinity. You have had some idea of the experiences of other people in heaven. Although my attention was focused on my own experience, I couldn't help but feel that everyone present shared the same level of joy, peace, and love that I did. It was as if each person was living their own perfect experience, but all together in an atmosphere of worship and love towards God. You mentioned that you didn't want to return. How did you manage to reconcile that feeling when coming back to the land? At first it was complicated. The sky is so beautiful and perfect that a part of me didn't want to leave it. However, I felt that God had a purpose in sending me back, and that conviction gave me the peace I needed to accept my return. Now I see my life here as a mission, to share what I have lived and to help others prepare for eternity. How has your experience influenced your perspective on worship? For me, worship has taken on a new meaning. In heaven, worship was not simply an action, but a perpetual state of being. Each and every being present there was devoted to the praise of God, not out of duty, but driven by overflowing joy and love. This celestial experience infused worship on earth with renewed enthusiasm and an unparalleled depth. No, I was not aware of the events occurring on earth while I was in heaven. I was so deeply immersed in the celestial experience that I was not aware of what was happening to my body or what was going on in the earthly world. It was only when Jesus revealed to me that it was not yet my time that I understood I would return. This experience completely transformed my perspective on work and daily activities. Now everything I do I see as an opportunity to bring a little piece of heaven to earth. Whether in my work, in my interactions with others, or even in the simplest tasks, I strive to approach them with the love and joy I experienced in heaven. This has led me to be more mindful and deliberate in the way I use my time and resources, always seeking to ensure they have lasting significance. Although I did not observe specific sentences being received, I felt a deep connection, a constant communication between heaven and earth. I understood that God is deeply aware and involved in the life of every person on earth. The prayer reveals itself as an authentic and powerful connection between us and heaven. Have you had the opportunity to learn something about the role of angels? Yes, I saw angels in heaven, and at that moment I understood the essence of their purpose. They were in constant worship, dedicated to fulfilling God's will. I realized that their role in our lives is much more significant than we often imagine, always acting under divine authority. How has your experience influenced your relationship with those who do not believe? This experience awakened in me a renewed urgency to share my faith, but it also cultivated in my heart a deeper patience and love for those who do not yet believe. I now understand more clearly that each person follows a unique path and that God's love encompasses everyone, regardless of what stage they are at in their spiritual journey. I try to share my experience in a way that invites reflection, without exerting pressure, always respecting the free will of each person. The relationship between the nature of free will and the sovereignty of God is a profound theological topic. Throughout my journey, I have managed to gain some understanding and have come to feel that divine sovereignty and human free will coexist in a way that is complex and difficult to fully grasp with our limited earthly minds. I understood that God's love is immense, a love that grants us the freedom to make authentic choices. Sometimes these choices can cause us pain, either to ourselves or to those around us. However, in the midst of it all, He always strives to transform every circumstance into something positive. Have you ever managed to understand the nature of evil or the existence of suffering in the world? Although I did not find evil in the sky, my experience provided me with a deeper insight into its essence, especially when contrasting it with what is good. The profound goodness and unconditional love I experienced made the reality of evil and suffering on earth even more striking. I understood that evil in its essence is simply the absence of divine goodness, a distortion of the perfect creation that God had conceived. This experience made me understand even more the importance of bringing God's light to the shadows of this world. How did your near-death experience impact your perception of the fear of dying? For me, that experience completely transformed my fear of death. I now perceive death not as an end, but as a transition to something infinitely more beautiful and serene. I have left fear behind, as I have had the opportunity to experience firsthand what awaits us. However, this does not imply that I long for the arrival of my end. On the contrary, I deeply feel that God has a purpose for me in this place, and I yearn to fulfill it. I await that moment with a serene joy, aware that death is nothing more than a door that opens to eternity with God. I have completely eliminated any fear of death. Now, I perceive death not as an end, but as a transition to something much more beautiful than we can imagine. However, this does not mean that I am in a hurry to depart. I feel that God has a special purpose for me in this place, and I am determined to fulfill it. When my time comes, I will receive it with joy, with the certainty of what awaits me. What message would you like people to remember from your experience? I wish for everyone to understand that God's love for each one of us is infinitely greater than we can imagine. Heaven is a reality, a place of beauty and perfection that surpasses our understanding. Each of our decisions and actions in this life has an eternal significance, and that is even more crucial than we might think. I want people to understand that a relationship with Jesus is what truly prepares us for eternity. It's not about achieving perfection or following a strict set of rules. Rather, it's about opening our hearts and accepting His love and forgiveness. Thank you for sharing your wonderful story with us. Before concluding, is there anything else you would like to add? I want to emphasize that, although my experience was intense and transformative, the most significant aspect is not my personal story, but the immense love story that God has for humanity. My desire in sharing what I experienced is that each person feels inspired to seek God on their own and to adopt an eternal perspective on life. I am grateful for the opportunity to share my experience. Your story is truly extraordinary and invites us to reflect deeply on life, death, and what awaits us beyond. Once again, thank you.